Hello, everyone. Welcome to this is episode 5 now of pairing with James Shore on Nullables and A-frame architecture. I think we've been focusing mostly on Nullables, and I think today we're going to get to a little bit more of the A-frame. Maybe we'll see.
It's been about 3 weeks since we last recorded,
Yes.
since we last streamed,
Right?
and as I recall, last time what we were doing was we had just finished. What did we do? We had just finished making a nullable for a notifier, I believe.
Yeah. So in our game service, so what we've been doing is we've created nulls for the notifier, and so now the game service is taking the three things, interfaces or classes, and these are all nullable. And so one of the things we mentioned at the end of the last time was once we finish making everything nullable, we can look at making game service itself nullable.
Right. That's right, and that's not really A-frame architecture yet. So over the break, I published an update to my article, which I'm not sure if you have a fast link for it or not, but the short link is jamesshore.com/s/nullables. Will take you there. And that got a lot of attention, maybe because it was the Christmas break, maybe because it was good. I don't know. It could be either. But it got a lot of attention. And there's, I think the A-frame architecture aspect of it is a lot less interesting to people than the nullability aspect of it. Yeah. And one of the reasons is, of course, if you're doing A-frame architecture or hexagonal or clean or, imperative shell, functional core, any of these things, the problem is that it's really hard to do unless you have a greenfield system. Right. Because you've got that chicken and egg, how do I refactor without having tests, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I would be fine if this ended up being more of a Nullables live stream than a Nullables and A-frame architecture live stream.
That's fine.
And making the game service nullable is part of the nullability pattern.
Right.
And I think that would start to sort of get us in the direction of A-frame architecture a little bit. Before we do that, what I would love to do, though, is I would like to make a low-level HTTP client infrastructure wrapper so you can see what happens when that exists and the kinds of benefits it would have for a game service average fetcher and game service notifier, if I remember the names correctly.
Notifier and fetcher. Yep.
Yeah. So if you're okay with it, I think that would be an interesting thing to do next.
Sure. Where do we
start?
All right.
Should I continue navigating?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What we're going to do is, one thing I found, and this wasn't what I originally expected to happen when I first created the idea of Nullables, because Nullables didn't spring fully formed from my head.
Right.
It wasn't magic. I did a lot of dumb things, and I slowly made them smarter and smarter. And as I got smarter and I figured out new ways of doing things, that revealed new possibilities. And one of the things that happened fairly sort of in the middle is I had multiple services that I wanted to access. This was actually for my subscriptions coding service, Let's Code JavaScript.com, which is now freely available. There's no longer behind a subscription paywall. And for that, I had Auth0, which was a service, and I had Recurly as a service. And of course, they were both REST services,
right?
However you want to define that, which I, again, don't want to get into.
No, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, exactly. So of course, what I wanted to do, and I don't make a distinction between notifiers and fetchers like you do. It was just, here's the abstractions I want for Auth0, here's the abstractions I want for Recurly. And both of those needed to make HTTP requests. And so of course I factored out an HTTP client. Actually, I called it REST client, low-level infrastructure wrapper. And I made that, and then years later, I made it nullable. When I first did this, I did the exact same thing you did, which is I put some manual tests around it. I put a big comment saying, don't change this without testing it manually. I washed my hands of it, and I sort of went somewhere else. And then I didn't touch it for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But the thing that happened was I was using a login service called Persona, which was done by Mozilla, which hardly anybody has heard of, especially not now.
Right.
And it was never successful, and they end-of-lifed it. And so I needed to redo my entire login flow, which was not really what I wanted to do with my time, 4 years after creating this site. And I couldn't make any changes to it because I had all that stuff that wasn't tested. But at that point, and when I first did it, I didn't know about nullables. I hadn't figured that out yet. But when I went to put in Auth0, I had figured out nullables. And so I went and I ripped out the Persona client. I made the REST client nullable. I added the Auth0 client, made it nullable. And then a couple of years later, and I put sort of these tests around it, where I set up sort of a fake server, and then I would make calls against that server and see that it was called correctly. Right. And then a couple of years later, I realized, well, wait, I don't need to do that. I can just have my high-level adapter. Whiskey Sierra says, why do I call it wrappers instead of adapters? Because I like simple names, and wrapper means I'm wrapping something up. That's all. There's no difference. So I realized that this Auth0 wrapper that I created, I didn't have to test it against a fake server or an HTTP server. I could just use the existing capabilities of the HTTP client nullability work to just investigate how is the HTTP client making its request, because I've got the output tracking on it. And so now I do it that way. And that means that the high-level adapters, wrappers, are super easy to create because you don't have to set up any sort of HTTP server at all, but you can still get a full suite of high-grade tests around them. And so that's what I think would be interesting to do here, because your game service average fetcher, your game service notifier, they don't have any tests on them, or at least not any meaningful tests. But if we create a low-level HTTP client, one, it will allow us to factor out our duplication of the embedded stub, and it will allow us to put tests around those adapters. And I think both of those would be good things.
All right. Well, that sounds like a plan.
All right. So let's do that. So over here on the right, and the average score fetcher, you can see that stubbed REST template. And then if you pull up the notifier, we're going to have something really similar. Yeah, now we have a simpler version of that REST template, but they're both stubbing out the same thing, which is the REST template.
Right. Yeah, they're just using different aspects of it. And this is why I didn't used to differentiate between notifiers and fetchers, but as I was teaching Hexagonal more and more, it was useful to differentiate because of the different test doubles that were used. That notifiers would need some sort of spy because it was outgoing only, whereas fetchers you could stub out. And we sort of see somewhat of similar, like certainly the fetcher is this fetcher is a bit more involved, but it's basically a stub, and that's sort of similar to so basically I separated out and gave those names for purposes of how do I test this and how do I approach that.
That's interesting. One thing that I've never been sold on with the hexagonal architecture is this concept of splitting out notifiers and fetchers. Like, that does not inspire me. I don't see value there. But hearing you say that there is a different type of test, that's interesting. I do see that. And I wonder if with using nullables, if you'll still find value in doing that distinction, because there isn't the same kind of distinction when using nullables, or there isn't the need for the same kind of distinction when using nullables as there is when you're using dummies or stubs.
Yeah, and it does, come from the idea of these are the names of the ports in the outbound ports in the hexagonal architecture, which, doing it in Java, you need interfaces, and I want small, narrow interfaces, and so I want them to be sort of single purpose. The fetcher is going to one place, the notifier is going to another place. So there's not going to be really any commonality across them that would be shared. And so, then the testing sort of encourages that those interfaces are small as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the single responsibility principle, which is what you're talking about, is a tricky one because anything can be defined as a responsibility, right? So in my mind, the responsibility is to represent the service, in which case I want to represent everything about the service.
Mm-hmm.
And in your mind, you're talking about, well, one responsibility is to talk to the service, and the other responsibility is to listen or make requests of the service. I do find that because responsibilities can be defined in so many different ways as a design principle, it's not super helpful. It's a way of excusing what you've already decided to do, but it doesn't help me decide what to do. I do want to keep my classes and objects with a clear common responsibility, but what is a responsibility?
Notice that I did not use the term single responsibility principle. I think I'm somewhat like you in that. I think it's not a very helpful principle because it gets back to what you just said. It's like, what is a responsibility, and is this a single one? For me, I'm always approaching it from what does the application need? The fact that it might be using the same remote service for both the fetching and notifying is an implementation detail to me. And so I see it very much as this application needs this piece of information, where it gets it from somewhere, but that's and there's a bit of CQRS, the architectural style of splitting read and write paths, and the more
CQRS being command query response separation.
Yeah, which was popularized by Greg Young, no relation, way back 15 years ago. And the more I focused on sort of, again, from the testability standpoint, the more it just naturally, these things fell apart. And a lot of times in this application, there's only one remote service. And so it might be like, well, why have them separate if they're talking to the same service? But oftentimes in my actual applications, production applications that use, that go along hexagonal, they're talking to different services. And in fact, some of them are replaceable. And that's something hopefully we'll get a chance to explore, this idea of what if I need to switch service implementations? Yeah. What does that look like?
So do you ever have, just sort of exploring this idea of what's the right level of abstraction? I like my stuff to be super concrete. I don't like a lot of abstraction in my code because you end up with leaky abstractions when you over abstract. I'm not saying that you're over abstracting. That's not the judgment I'm making here. So do you ever find that one fetcher is talking to multiple services, or do you tend to have one fetcher per service?
It depends.
Well, but have you ever had multiple?
Yeah, so I've had where I had a little weather application, so it would fetch weather information. So there's one implementation where one concrete implementation per source, basically per API, per remote API. And I would switch among those through a configuration. Mm-hmm. So there's where I had the interface was basically abstracting over multiple concrete real production implementations, because I was basically wanted to load balance across them because of cost reasons. Another scenario is I'm switching over one of my services to a different SMS text message provider from Twilio to something else. But even there, if you look at it, the adapter, the outbound port, it's not that there are two implementations of that port. There's actually two implementations of the text message sender, and that's much closer aligned to sort of the nullables, because it's literally, this is the boundary. I can't squeeze it anymore before I actually am now talking to concrete, something that I don't control. because it's a Twilio SDK or it's another person's SDK, and I just instantiate that and call it. And there's no further deep that I can go in those.
Yeah, that's actually not the question I was asking. It wasn't, do you have multiple implementations of the same interface? Because that happens, obviously. It was actually more, do you have a fetcher which is an abstraction over multiple services simultaneously, or a notifier? Or is there more of a tight coupling 1-to-1 between fetcher, well, 2-to-1, fetcher and notifier to a service?
Maybe I'm still not understanding your question. So
let's say, I guess I'm trying to understand the level of abstraction you like for your ports. So let's say that you're doing your weather app, and it so happens that there are multiple services that provide different levels of detail. One service gives you the next week's weather. I've never done it.
Oh, so I see. Yeah.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
And another service gives you like the Farmer's Almanac next 6 months.
Right.
But for whatever reason, you need to collate these things. So you present it behind a single interface.
So using the weather example, I might need to find out, maybe I'm running my own prediction. So I collect data over the past 6 months and present theirs along with mine. That would, again, it's driven by the usage in the application domain code. What does it need in order to do its work? So in that case, it needs all this data, and it's getting it from one service. It may require 4 different remote calls, back and forth calls to the API provider.
But still typically one.
But it would be one fetcher, possibly 1 or 2 implementation methods, again, depending on what the application needs. So for me, I'm always driving it by, I don't care what the service is, how it presents itself. So I very much see the adapters, the outbound adapters as almost a true facade. Like, I want to make it, what would I, if I could make a wish and I can get an implementation, what would be the best fit for the application? What does it need? When does it need it? In what form does it need it? And so I always start from there. And to me, this is something where I think people get wrapped up in. I look at it as just the same way as like it's encapsulated. Like I'm putting a facade in front of it, and I don't want to think about that until I get to that implementation. And then once I get to the implementation, then it does whatever it needs to do.
Yeah, I think you and I have very similar philosophies around that. I mean, when I'm making a wrapper or an adapter, my only real thinking in terms of the API design for that wrapper is what is convenient for the caller.
Right.
And then it is the responsibility of the implementation to make that, to translate that into whatever is needed,
right.
Whether it is one call or multiple calls.
Right.
For example, when I had that Recurly wrapper, now I did call it Recurly because that mattered to me. It wasn't generic subscription service, because the behavior of Recurly was relevant to the behavior of my code, and trying to make that invisible, I didn't think it would have served me well. And I think that's really the only difference here, is that I don't try to hide things that I design the API for the needs of the caller, but I don't hide the nature of the thing that I'm wrapping, if that makes sense. Now, in the future, if I had actually had like a Stripe and a Recurly and or whatever, and I was bouncing between them, I would actually make a higher level service called subscription service, and it would use Recurly service or Recurly client and Stripe client and what have you client. And if it was configurable, then you would pass in a configuration option to that subscription service or subscriber service, and it would go out. But when I was using just the Recurly client, Recurly was not my favorite service ever, and their engineering practices when I was using it had left enough to be desired that I was noticing flaws, and their API design wasn't great. So I had to I wanted to say, given this email address, is this person subscribed? It's a fairly simple question. And so that was actually 2 if, as I recall, it was a couple of API calls under the scenes, as well as this big switch statement interpreting like the 6 different where I had to loop through all possible. It was a mess. But anyway, there was a lot of logic in there to make this thing go, and all of that was hidden behind is subscribed email. And then it would parse the XML and it would figure out what the different types of subscriptions were, and it would say yes or no. Or I think I may have told you about this before. One of them literally just threw an exception. I have no idea what this category is, and it's not mentioned in the documentation. If it ever shows up, do something. That never came up. But anyway, so I think we have. I think the only real difference in our philosophy here is that, although I will design the API for the needs of the caller, I tend not to create abstractions. I tend to be really, really, really concrete until I have multiple implementations that drive the need for that abstraction. So if something is zero, I will say auth 0 client. Yeah,
I don't. I think we're closer than you may. I don't like. It'll still have an interface, and I will try to have a light abstraction. But again, it's more about, like Sweegie says, like what is the thing I need? What is the thing the application needs in order to progress and do its job? What's the easiest? Like you said, how do I make it easiest on the caller? Which I think is one of the most fundamental principles, and it's that other part of encapsulation, is that stop thinking. I always tell people, like, stop thinking about how you're going to implement it and think about what makes it easy for you. Then put the hard stuff in that box.
And that's 100% agreed on that. And I think if you only have 2 design principles, that's one of them, and the other one is once and only once, which is a richer version of the don't repeat yourself principle. Saying that every concept needs a spot once. And
so in my Ensembler application, which I think is of the applications that I've developed, is the more complex. I do have an interface for scheduling Zoom calls, because I thought I might be using a different service. Ended up not. So that was probably a premature abstraction where there's no mention of Zoom from the application side. It's just some conference scheduler. But there's only one implementation, and it fit very well with again, sort of what does the caller need.
Well, this is relevant to what we're about to do, because what we need to do, I mean, assuming you're okay with the idea of making a common HTTP client for both the average fetcher and game service average fetcher and the
score notifier.
Game service HTTP, I don't remember what your names are, HTTP score category notifier. If you're agreed that making an HTTP client would be useful for that, we need to decide what that's going to look like. And I've been saying HTTP client as a shorthand, but I think what we'd really be wrapping is REST template. But we want to put an interface on that that looks like what we care about. And maybe going exactly the opposite of everything I've been just saying right now. I don't think REST template's the interesting thing here. I don't think calling it like REST template is the right abstraction. I think this is about making HTTP requests. And whether we call that HTTP client or HTTP request or something else is I think the decision that we have to make.
Whiskey Sierra had a question. Did you want to answer it about the A-frame architecture?
Let me see. The question is, why do I consider the UI to be special in comparison to, say, the database, clock, random, or any other pieces of infrastructure? What makes a UI special to you? That's a great question. And I think there's 2 parts to that. So I've got my handy dandy little low-tech diagram here, not nearly as nice as the one you made for hexagonal architecture. The UI, so there is a piece of UI that's infrastructure. For example, I was recently making a command line app. I've talked about it before, a little stock market thing. And so I've made an infrastructure wrapper called IO. And what that does is that reads data from the command line and it writes data back out to the command line. And it abstracts nodes, read line thing. But the code that decides what to do with that input and output. So it's an interactive command line application. You start it up and it says, tell me the name of the spreadsheet you're going to enter, and I type it in. And it says, now paste it in, and I paste it in because I'm too lazy to figure out how to parse spreadsheets. But cut and paste works great. So, and I do that over and over again. So it's very interactive. So the IO wrapper is used to manage that input and output, but the decisions about what it's asking for and what it does with that information, that's very much at the UI level. And so I don't consider that to be the same as a database, clock, random, or anything else. That is the traffic cop logic. And I think you call it application logic too, don't you, Ted?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what's interesting is so Hexagonal sort of splits that out a bit. There's the thing that's driving. What's telling the application to do anything, right? Who's sort of triggering things to happen? And that's inbound adapters in Hexagonal. But ultimately, the thing that's the traffic cop, the coordinator, or whatever you want to call it, the thing that's saying, oh, you want me to do X? Okay, I need to do A, B, and C, 1, 2, 3 in that order. That's the application layer.
Yeah, and I think the one difference between what I'm doing and what you're doing in Hexagonal, and I'm not sure if this is a difference or not, but I would consider the controller to be part of the application layer, not the infrastructure layer. And looking at your code, it looks like you've got controller more as part of the inbound rack.
Right, because the way I see it is the inbound adapter, it's responsible for translating, whether it's an HTTP message or a WebSocket frame or a Kafka queue message, interpreting that and saying what, in a sense, at the use case or command level, that's where you sort of hit the border of what's the domain responsible for the application domain. And so the adapter is translating that. So it's a very thin layer. It's saying you type X, oh, that means do this. You type Z, oh, that means do this. Whereas from an API, it may be a command saying, hey, deposit, and here's an amount, and withdraw, and here's an amount. And so the adapter is just translating the intent. But once you understand the intent, then it's all application.
You want to pull up one of your controllers real quick?
Yeah. Switch
and Whiskey Sierra said, asked you, the application layer is UI agnostic, which is basically what I heard you just saying, is that it's sort of a set of commands or transaction scripts almost.
Yeah, so sort of the transaction scripts or the commands or converting into commands, that's all application layer. Yeah, and that's the idea, is that it's not just sort of UI agnostic. It could be a full service, fully back-end service where there's no direct connection to a front end, in which case there's still something like a controller. And so if we look at the controller here, we can see posts come in and are generally translated to some kind of command method in our application. So if we hit this endpoint, that means start the game. So we say game service start, and then we just redirect.
Yeah.
So roll dice, same thing. Where it gets a little bit more sort of tedious, perhaps, is just the request for information. But if we look at this, we're basically seeing that these requests, they're all query methods against the domain. So the adapter's job is to translate intent coming in, and then responses, it has to translate domain back out to whatever's appropriate for that view or that endpoint.
Yeah, and hopefully we will get a chance to talk about A-frame architecture in the future, because I think we'll get into this more, because there's what I've found, the reason I do it the way I do it, that I don't consider UI to be part of a service layer, it is because there's often, UI is complicated, and there's often substantial logic in there. And we see a little bit of that in your roll result method here. But in a richer application with more interaction, there would be a lot more logic here. And I want that to be
I'm going to say
sort of called out.
There would not be more logic here. That logic would still, so even in more complex apps, the logic, and this is, I mean, it's an interesting, I don't know if I probably don't want to get into it now, but like there is UI logic and there is application domain logic. And I think with some of the...
And that's what I mean when I say there's logic there. I'm talking about UI logic, not application domain logic.
And so sometimes that could be fully separate, right? So if you have a Vue or React, God forbid if you have one of those, I hope you really need it. Otherwise, it's a lot of overhead if you're basically just filling out a form. Mm-hmm. But the idea would be that the controllers, you'd have then multiple controllers depending on what you're doing, and it would be split out a lot. And again, it's still for me, the idea is that the application is where you're thinking about what do I want to do, and then the UI is figuring out how I want to do that. But I don't know if we want to get into that.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
When we do get into it, one of the consequences of doing it in the A-frame architecture way is that game service probably would cease to exist, because that's your command layer. That's sort of your application layer for your code. You're making commands on game service, and because that would sort of, well, we'll get into it later.
Yeah.
But But let's get back to the HTTP client. So let's talk about how we want to design this. What sort of interface do we want in this hypothetical HTTP client? You talked about one of my favorite tools, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is called programming by intention. And this is where you design an API by writing the code that's going to use it as if it already exists. And that does this amazing job of sort of helping you say, well, what is truly the caller's perspective on this thing?
Right.
So I wonder what it would be like if we did that here. If we actually scrolling up to not the nullability part, but just the regular implementation, if we had both of these work with some sort of generic HTTP client, how would we want that to work? Is it basically what we're getting out of REST template here?
I think it's for the most part what REST, how we're leveraging REST template, because REST template's doing quite a bit for us.
And we are going to continue to use it. I don't see any reason to not use it. As much as I gripe about heavyweight frameworks, if it's there, let's take advantage of it.
Yeah, right? It's there, and it's well tested, and it does more than just fetch text from some remote service. It does the conversion into a class for us. So it does a little bit of transformation work for us.
Yeah. So I think we want to keep doing that.
Yeah.
So what are those parameters? Can you do a command P on it or whatever So that's the URL, the response type, and the variables, which is what the.
So in this case, it's what is the category I want to return. So if we look at the URI, we can see that becomes a query parameter.
Oh, I see. It's like a parameterized query.
Yeah.
Like it's literally the variables. Got it. And then on the post side, what do we have there?
It's even easier. It's basically what's the URI, what's the outgoing object, and are we going to get anything back? And here I'm not expecting anything back.
Yeah. I think the only thing that bugs me about this that I would probably do differently, although there's a fine line between doing things just for yourself and doing things in a way that makes things better. It really bugs me that the class that is being passed in is positionally different in each of these. Like they both start with the URI, and then one has the class, and the other one has the variables, and then the other one has the variables and the class.
Well,
so
on the other hand, it's what am I? No, you're right. I was going to say something. I realized no, that's absolutely wrong. I agree. It's one of those. I'm sure nobody thought of the symmetrical aspects of are these these are symmetrical or similar, and should the things be so? It's like they're sort of. Let's see. Yeah, so for the post for entity, there's no excuse for having it in this order. With the get for entity, the only constraint is that because this last parameter is a var args, that has to be the last parameter because of Java.
Right.
But here, there's no excuse.
And what is that object request? What exactly are we doing there?
So basically, this is what gets sent out. So this is where we create a basically framework-friendly object, basically a DTO.
Okay, and that magically converts it to JSON.
Exactly.
And puts it in the post body.
Right.
Yeah. So I think if it was me, the way I would do this is I would probably call it HTTP client because that's what I tend to call these things. And I would make a get and I would make a post, and I would have it be URI class, which I would give a name. I don't know, a name like to make it clear that it's doing magic. And then for one, it would be query parameters, and the other one would be post body, is probably what I would call that.
Sounds good to me.
So what we can do here, and we don't have tests around the concrete implementation. So right. I think what I would do is I would actually not do it through refactoring. I would just make a new class. I would test drive that class. I would make it nullable, and then I would substitute it into place once it was ready.
Okay.
If we had tests around it, then I would factor it out. But since we don't have tests around it, we can't refactor as we go. Now, if it was me, partly because I've done this a bunch, so I know how to do it in JavaScript and Node, I would actually test drive that HTTP client, but that requires having the tests create a little server. And I don't know that that's worth it in this case.
What would you want the server to do? Just return known? It
would return configured. It would return a status,
right.
Headers and body,
right.
And it would do it for real, so that we could confirm that the REST template.get for entity works the way we expect it to under all kinds of weird situations. Like, well, how does it work when we return something that's not JSON? How does it work when we return a 404? How does it work when we return a 301? How does it work when we turn a, blah, 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 blah. And I would just set all this up, not so much to test REST template, but to test that it works the way I expect it to, and also to document how it works.
Right. Yeah,
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
It's not that. I mean, it is a lot of work, and it's not a lot of work. The hard part about that is setting up the local server, because most people are familiar with doing a HTTP request, but setting up an HTTP server in a lot of languages gets into some very deep magic in terms of the libraries that they've got available to you.
So Whiskey Sierra mentions, couldn't I use mock REST service server? Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to do, but it would require, because there's a lot of options.
It may not be the best use of our time.
And I don't think it's a good use of our time. It's something I can look at.
Yeah, and one thing I would want to be really clear with for the folks watching is that I'm not saying it's not a good use of people's time when they're doing real production work.
Right.
I just don't think it's a good use of our time on stream.
Right.
But if it was me doing it for real, it is absolutely what I would do. I would create it. I would test the snot out of it. I would know every little edge case, and I would have it documented in tests, so that I was in absolute control of my external service calls. But since we're not going to do that, let's just go ahead and make it, because all we really have to do is turn around and call REST template get for entity and REST template post for entity with the parameters in the right order.
Right. So do we want to? Should I just create an actual client object?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go do that. No, that's not what I wanted. Come on. Shortcuts are failing me. Where do we want to create that in?
I mean, I would call that a low-level adapter in your terminology. All right.
So I'll create.
So I would probably, it's not, it doesn't really fit into the in out because it's going to be both. So maybe low level or.
Well, so just to clarify, in is for things from the outside that come in that are triggering the application. In this case,
Right.
it is out because it is the application that's initiating it. Either way, whether it's doing a get or post, it's initiated by the application.
So the distinction would come in if we were doing something like Socket.io or WebSockets, right? Because that can go both ways.
Yeah, and that's an interesting case because in Hexagonal, I actually have the underlying WebSocket connection. I've actually done this for my TDD game. The underlying WebSocket connection is shared, but there's actually two adapters because one of them is initiating things and the other one is for sending stuff out.
Yeah.
But I think since we're triggering this from the application in both cases, we can put it in out.
Yeah, let's do that. Peyton, welcome.
Hey, Peyton Rolls. Your head.
Whiskey asks, so why not unify get post in a single method? And that is what I do when I do this in Node, because that's the way Node works. But I think in this case, Ted, because we're using the underlying REST template and it makes the distinction, there's no reason not to continue making that same distinction.
Yeah, because in Java, if we did put it on one, we'd be forcing the caller to specify parameters that they don't need to specify.
Yeah, like they'd have to add a quote get parameter or a constant or something like that. And
yeah, they'd have to say what are you doing? And also if there are parameters, there might be parameters on a post, although usually not. But yeah, I mean you could have it. I think it's unnecessary. Like I want to know if I'm getting or not. And
yeah, I mean I would make that sort of. I would do that if it added anything to the caller, but I don't think it does in this case.
No,
like being able to read the caller and have it say .get or .post.
Yeah,
that's really nice to read.
Yeah.
So I don't see any reason to make it a parameter.
Yeah. Hey there, Garrus. So we're basically gonna create.
Yeah, so I mean, normally I'd write a test here, but I think we're just going to make let's do a get. And
are we going to write tests at all for this?
We will write tests for it, but not until we get to the nullables part. And it's going to be a little awkward. Like, because this is a low-level wrapper, one of the things that you do when you're writing the test for the nullables is you have all the tests for the thing working for real.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you know everything's still working.
Mm-hmm.
So not having that is going to feel a little bit strange, I think. But yeah, let's start out just by making the get and the post.
Okay. So let's see. So the get.
I don't think we want to make a new instance of HttpClient every time we use it. So this will be parameterized. I think it'll be public T.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering if we were going to parameterize it. So.
Yeah, we're not going to parameterize HttpClient, I don't think. I think we'll just parameterize the method itself.
I call it R.
I can never remember where that letter goes. Is it before the public or after it?
It's after it.
Okay.
And so
but before the return type.
Yeah.
Oh no, that is the return type.
Well, so this says we're going to generify on the return type, and then it's going to be get.
So why'd you call that R instead of T?
Because T is sort of used as just some general type. Here I'm using R as this is the response type.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So get parameters should be the URI.
So is that an actual URI? Yes. No, it's not. It's a URL. Is it a URI here?
Yay, consistency.
Yay.
Let's take a string in both cases.
Yeah, let's take a string. So Suiji mentions it could use exchange. Yeah, we could, but that, what's nice is we can make that decision later if we decide, we want more information about something about, because it's like there wrappers on wrappers on wrappers inside the template. So so this is going to be URL. We need the response type. So this is going to be a class. What do we want to call this?
Let's call it, so this is the response type.
Yeah.
We could call it response type. And again, there's a lot to be said for using terms that people are familiar with and comfortable with. To me, that is, I would give it some name that reflected the fact that this is magically converting from JSON to class.
I think that's I'm not sure.
Always converting from JSON?
It's always converting from whatever you've told the REST template to do, and by default it's JSON. You can tell it depending on the whatchamacallit, the content type. Blanked on the word. Depending on the content type, if you set up XML, it can do XML, or you can plug in other ones. Those are what are called, underneath there's this thing called HTTP message converters that you can plug in your own if you want. By default, there are JSON converters.
And for us, because it's always JSON, because we're in control of it. So that's the real advantage of writing your own wrappers, right? Is you get to extract away all the complexity that it puts into place to handle everybody's scenarios. We handle just the one we care about. Right. So I think I would call this response JSON type or JSON response type. Okay. Or I would call it get JSON. But I want to be clear that we're expecting JSON out of this.
I almost like get JSON better.
Okay.
And then response type is what we're going to convert it into.
Right.
So let's converted response type.
And then the last one is the
these
URL
are the
parameters, right?
Yes. They call them variables, but we can call them parameters.
Let's call them variables. I think there's no reason to be.
There's a little inconsistency. I almost like URL parameters better.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on that one.
Because if we're gonna use URL here, then these are the URL parameters.
Sure. And then Sweetie makes a good point that it should be class R.
I meant to do that. All right.
All right. Why are we getting an error on that? Because we're not returning anything?
That's right. Yeah. They're wrong again.
Whiskey Sierra says first argument is a URI template.
Well, yeah, it is a template. Who do we blame for calling it a URL?
Well, it doesn't matter that's the implementation, right? It's just what we want to call it. I think calling it URL template might help clarify that the parameters go with the URL.
Yeah. So let's do that. Let's call it URL template, and then then it makes more sense for these to be then URL variables.
Okay.
Because it is doing this substitution with this special syntax, and this syntax is the variable syntax. So
yeah, never seen that before. Am I just ignorant, or is that sort of a?
It's not like a global standard. It's something that Spring uses a lot of. This replacing what's within curly braces.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we should be able to just return the same call that you've already got there.
Right. So let's make an instance of. So do I want to make an instance of REST template here?
Yeah, I don't think there's any state associated with it, so we might as well just create it once and.
Yeah.
And we will make this nullable later, but I think for
Yeah.
now we just want to do a simple implementation.
So we're going to do get for entity. Oh, there is one that takes a URI. Okay. Yeah, there are all sorts of variants. There's one that also takes a map for the variables, but I'm not using that one. So we'll just do...
But this is the one we want, right?
Yeah. So URL template, convert response type, and URL variables. Oh, and we need to... oh, we're doing a get body on it. That's why. Because that's this part of it.
Right.
Do we want to do that here?
Yeah, I think we do.
I think so. Yeah. Now it's complaining about this. Is it really confusing?
Do we need to put a R on there on the method call?
On which method? On this method call?
Yeah.
No, because it's the return value of this is identified by basically by this class.
Mm-hmm.
It's complaining about. All right, let's do that. So this string. Varargs. Bane of. Really? What do you want to do? Oh, does this think it's? Oh, it is object. All right. Yes, arrays, backwards compatibility. Someday that'll go away. Okay. That's kind of ugly, but whatever. It's just a warning. All right.
Okay.
So that's our get JSON.
Great. Let's do the post JSON.
All right. So it's going to be like that one. This one does not need to be generified. I'll say like post with JSON.
I'm not loving either of these method names. Get. I mean, it's really get and convert JSON. But now we're getting ugly. Keep on going. We'll fix the names.
Okay. So that's a template. We want the class. What do we want to call this? What are they called here? Request. So there's a request type. Request type. And that's actually it.
Hey, BVN. What we're doing here is we are creating a generic HTTP client for our adapters to use. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it nullable so that we can test it both in the higher level adapters and the rest of our code without having to actually set up an external service.
So object request. Oh, that's the actual request. So never mind. That's not a class. That's object. My bad.
Well, we were going to put the class second, right?
So the class is what it translates. So the class is needed by the return. Since we're not actually returning, we're going to hide the void inside of our new method.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we don't even care about the response type because we're not getting any responses.
Yeah. If we were sending parameters out as part of the post, basically URL parameters, then we would need something else, but we're not doing that.
And when we do need it, if we ever do, we can just refactor this.
Yeah. So that's a template and request type, and that we're not expecting. Oops. Anything back. Oops. Oh, we're not doing a return because we're not expecting anything back. I think that's right. I don't know why. All right.
Suiji suggests that we call it JSON HttpClient, and I kind of like that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and again, if we ever wanted to do something other than JSON, we could rename it again and do that. But
yeah. And those are just get and post.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's super clean. I like that. Okay, let's commit that, and I think it's time for a break. And,
yeah, it is.
And when we come back, I think it will be time to make it nullable. So we'll put tests around it, and then we'll start making it nullable. It makes me a little itchy that we haven't actually tested that this works, but we have no way of doing that at present. I guess we could.
There is at least one test that uses the real service that's currently running. Although I don't know that it verifies anything other than it works as expected. So it's not well covered.
Right. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll just test it when we integrate it.
Yeah.
We'll YOLO it.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a short coffee brain break, and when we come back, we'll nullabilize it.
All right. See you soon. Yeah. So yeah, I think the thing to do now is to put some tests around this. Got a comment from Suiji saying we could write some tests against JSON placeholder.typicode.com. I'm not familiar with that. Are you?
That's what I was looking at. Sort of. That's the service that basically provides fake information. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah.
It's you'd have to test it against what you're expecting, and
that would be a way of sort of getting up and running quickly on stream, but
yeah.
I would never do that in real life. And the reason is that I actually don't want my tests to depend on anything outside of my computer.
Right. No, I agree with that. And this won't help you also do like, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong?
Right.
There may be ways to do that. I'd have to look more at this project, but there are, I mean, again, sort of if we were going to do this in the real world, then there's certainly enough tools where in Java you can set up basically a mock server. It's not terribly hard.
Yeah. There's WireMock, of course.
Yeah.
Deepak says Nullable being part of production code makes me wonder if we need to test the Nullable part of the code, and the answer is absolutely we do, and we are about to.
All right.
And Whiskey says James has a clear opinion on that. I think I just proved that out in practice. Yeah, so people, after I published this article, I got a couple of requests for, well, you're calling it production code, but it's not really production code, right? And actually, I realized, I think I've told the story about using it to do cache warming, right? So when my server starts up, I basically have it go out and make requests using the nullables. I make a nullable request and I send that through the system exactly as if they'd come in from the browser, so that will warm up my hot paths. But I have another one that came to mind. I don't know if I've shared this with you before, Ted. I made a continuous integration script that basically, it's not what most people would think of continuous integration, but it's what I think of continuous integration. It basically runs on my computer, and it will check to see that I've checked everything in, and it will merge the branches, and it will push to the server. Like, it will do all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I wrote that using Nullables. So there's a class called repo, which represents everything you can do with the repository. It's really big. You'd probably hate it. It's got stuff like merging branches and pushing to Heroku and checking if the repository is dirty and stuff like that. Well, it's a nullable repo. And so in my continuous integration script, it checks for a dry run flag. And if there's a dry run flag, it uses the null version, the nulled version of the repo. Otherwise, it uses the real version of the repo. And so when you run it with dry run, it goes through and runs the entire script per normal. Of course, it doesn't do anything because it's been nulled out. And so there's another example of a production usage of using nullables. Obviously, it's not the thing you're going to do most of the time, but anytime that your code might want to pretend to do something but not really do it, that's when you'd be using the nulled versions of your production code.
Yeah. And so speaking on behalf of splitting things into finer grain, the first thing I would be thinking about is because I've done some stuff with Git and anyway, having the ability to null out the writes, but have real reads is an interesting thing. So that it actually says, oh, you've updated this, and what does that look like if I what kind of things would it do, but not really do? Because
that is a really good point, and I think that's a fantastic argument for having that command query.
Separation.
Is it response separation? CQR,
so the original thing that was written in object-oriented software construction by Birch and Meyer was command query separation, talking about objects and their interfaces, their what they present to the world. That's like one of my fundamental principles is command query separation, because that
I don't share that at all. That's interesting.
And the more I do that, the more I see these kinds of things pop out, especially at the application level. Like there's stuff where it's okay for it to directly talk to the repository. It's not going through the application, it's retrieving information. Why have some dumb intermediary? But for writes, I definitely want it to go through this other path. So that's CQS. CQRS is the architectural style of having probably separate databases. And that's where you get eventual consistency of all the writes, because those are happening, maybe 10% of the time. And so you're prioritizing the reads, but that's sort of a throughput performance architectural aspect that relies on underneath that you've got commands coming in and sort of queries going out.
Got it.
Oh, Suichi, thank you for the Prime Gaming sub, and John CVV, thank you before for your Prime Gaming sub. I appreciate it. Oh, and Dota Chatitude, 16 months. Wow. Holy cow. Yeah, so the more, and that's why I tend to view and work with Hexagonal sort of through that lens of reads versus write. Not because I think there's a lot you can do a lot without having to split things into separate services running on separate machines, but it really I find that having that separation makes a lot of sense to me for just organizing the code and organizing things.
Yeah. And one thing I want to be clear on is that I've been saying, well, I don't do that, but that doesn't mean that my way is right and your way is wrong.
Yeah.
And there's nothing about the Nullables approach or even A-frame architecture that says that you have to do it one way or the other. That is very much a decision to be made. I will tend to go with the simplest thing that I can until need has been proven. So, for example, and sometimes I'll go overboard. Like this repo thing, it talks to Heroku, it talks to Git, like it does it all.
Right.
And that's partly because I'm really super lazy, and I will let things get bad before I abstract, rather than because I found abstracting early is so painful to reverse. It is much easier to make an abstraction late than to fix a bad abstraction that was made too early. So now these days I let my code get really ugly. Partly because I know that with good tests I can fix anything.
Exactly.
So I don't stress about whether it's perfect or not. I'm just like, let's get it done. And but the point you're making about the reads versus writes, it is super on point. Like for a dry run, of course you'd want to be able to read the real thing.
The real stuff,
and but not do any writes. So anyway, back to JSON HttpClient test. I think let's go ahead and pull over one of these, like say game service average fetcher test. Let's grab some of its nullable stuff, and we're just going to re-implement that in a more generic way. So let's see. This may not be usable. Oh, that's the wrong test.
Which test do we want to look at?
We want to look at one of the in adapters.
Oh. Really?
No, out adapters. I'm sorry, I get confused. I think of fetchers as in because it's coming in, the data is coming into us. But no, I think average score category. That's the one. Okay. There we go. So yeah, we basically want to do all of these things, except we want to do them more generically. So we could just copy this over and then sort of bring them up to speed.
All right.
I don't know how you normally do this sort of thing. I tend to cut and paste and then comment out and then just sort of gradually go through them one at a time. And I use it more as a cheat sheet for what do I want to do than necessarily using the material directly.
Well, let's do the first one, and then I'll see how I want to do the rest. Let's comment those out.
So we're obviously not going to have a score fetcher. We're going to... Well, let's start with the test name. Null get returns default value. Oh, and one of the things that so I've gotten a lot of feedback about the name. People hate the name Nullables. It's like, well, in Haskell, there's something already called a nullable, and there's null objects, and there's nulls, and there's optional values. Can't you come up with a better name? And the answer is no, I can't come up with a better name. But one thing that I did do is I do say that the nulled version is nulled, not null. So that's a naming distinction that I would make here, is the nulled get returns a default value.
Okay. We'll figure out what these are going to be. So we're going to move up a JSON client. Oops. But we're not going to...
And actually, that should be JSON. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Create null. So is it create null or create nulled?
Create null.
Okay. So go ahead and create that.
Once it's been created, it has been nulled.
Gotcha. All right.
Okay. So yeah, let's do a JSON client.get with any URL, doesn't matter.
I'll just grab this one.
But I actually wouldn't use that one because I would want to make it really clear that the URL isn't relevant. In fact, I'd probably just do get irrelevant URL.
Like that. And our converted response type, what do we want for that? Because that's going to be whatever.
Yeah, so I think we're going to want to make ourselves a little do nothing DTO.
Do we want it to be, want it to have something in it though?
Yeah, like just a string or something.
So oops.
Speaking of names, Suiji says that they use nullable thing, wrapped thing, and nulled thing. I use nullable for the class itself, and then for the embedded stub, I would probably use wrapper. I think we ended up doing wrapper, wrapper, real, and stubbed. I like that. That's what I ended up putting in the article as I was sort of thinking about it more in depth. What did you end up doing for nothing DTO there?
So I just created something that has a string called nothing.
Can we call that example DTO instead?
Sure.
And I don't care about that
I'm
part.
just going to call this content.
That's probably better.
Slow this down. So this is then our example DTO class.
And we don't need any variables at all, do we?
We do not. And I forgot a comma. That's why that's complaining. Okay. And then this returns an example DTO. Oh, we did not generify this. Let's go ahead and do that. What's it complaining about? Oh, just that it may return null pointer. Okay. And so what are we going to want to, we're going to want to assert something about example DTO.
I think dot get content is equal to, well, what do we expect it to be equal to?
We didn't specify anything yet, so we don't know.
Yeah, so this is going to be the tricky part of doing this stub, because we are going to have to do that reflection on the class name and actually create an instance. But I think it should, line 27, make that equal to initial value or something like that. And then we'll expect it to equal initial value.
Oh, so literally the string initial value?
Yeah, yeah, sorry.
All right. So that we could say this. Initial value. So I'm gonna, why can't I just put space? There we go. Okay.
Yep, that works for me. And then yeah, let's make that work.
So this will fail because we're returning null. So we'll get a null pointer exception. Sweetie asks, are we still on JDK 11? Yeah, we're still on I'm going to upgrade us to 17 probably pretty soon. Okay, so we did get a null pointer exception. So here we want to return. What do we want to return here?
Well, now we're going to, yeah. And now here's where we're going to pass in. We can just steal all the existing code from, or most of the a lot of the existing code from average score fetcher. Thank goodness, because there's all that templating stuff that took us forever to figure out last time.
So let's grab. Feels like we don't need all of this though. We just need the,
no. Let's copy it, and then we'll delete a whole bunch of the stubbing stuff. But we need
because I know we're going to need this stuff, and I guess we'll need some stub. Okay, all right.
Yeah, we're going to need. What we aren't going to need is the details of how we're doing the stubs.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So I see people talking about my book club for my book in the chat. The link, if anybody wants to see those book club entries, is jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club.
And I'll throw up a link there later.
I hope.
Or
click that, see what happens.
There we go. Yeah, names are hard, especially for patterns. So, all right. So we've got. Oh, that's interesting because it did a. did something really bad. Okay.
Oh, right, because those are all private. So I tried using your magic keystroke in WebStorm, which is the IntelliJ variant that I use for JavaScript, and it wasn't supported.
Which one? Which magic keystroke?
The one where you're doing multi-select.
Really?
The Control G one.
Huh.
Yeah.
That should be...
It didn't work, and then when I did a keystroke search, I found it in IntelliJ, and I couldn't find it in WebStorm.
Huh. Interesting.
I was bummed out.
That's unfortunate. I mean, if you have the commercial version of IntelliJ, then there's no need to have WebStorm because it includes all the stuff that WebStorm has.
Well, I have the commercial version of WebStorm, but not IntelliJ.
Yeah.
That's because WebStorm's $50 and IntelliJ is $150 or something like that.
More now. They recently raised the price. So. All right. So we've got our REST template wrapper. We've got our so get for entity. So that's the interface. And we've got the stubbed REST template.
I feel like it's going to seem like busy work, but I think we should take out all the response stubbing that we're doing and just have it return a hard-coded value.
I think I'll need a little bit more guidance because I'm not sure where I want to do that.
Well, I'm not paying full attention because I've been looking at the chat, but
okay.
So starting on line 62, well, line 57, we can delete that. And line 56, we can delete the parameters.
No, then we don't need that constructor at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we don't need this stuff.
Yeah. And we're going to end up re-implementing it, but...
Yeah, that's actually the whole thing is just...
and then we can delete requires average 4 on line 61.
Right. Get body we'll need, but we won't need average.
No.
So we don't need this constructor. And
here we're going to have to do some sort of reflection.
Yeah, for now I'm just going to do null until we figure that out. Okay, so we've got
yeah, I think we're good there.
Okay.
We should just pass in stubbed REST template into our constructor.
Template wrapper. Yes, template wrapper. Field for that. And assign it.
And that should be private constructor as well.
Yeah. Let's see. So we create null. We'll create the one with the stubbed REST template. So that when we do the get, we want to do it against the wrapper.
Right.
So REST template wrapper.
That should give us a null equals initial value back.
Right. In fact, let's make it. We're gonna cast it.
Can we do that?
Can we cast it? It's sketchy, but
we're gonna get a class cast exception or whatever Java's exception is.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Because it's not a string.
Yeah.
Hey, I even remembered the right exception.
I kind of wanted it to fail because I wanted to make sure that this was sort of being invoked. And so this is sort of my probe of figuring that out.
Oh, yeah. Because if you did null, it could have come from anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we do null, then it'll fail because of null point exception. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to have the stubbed response entity. It's going to need to know the class, and then we're going to use reflection to instantiate the class.
Right. Let's see. So who's got?
And you know what we might want to do? I ended up doing this in my example code. I think it might be useful to group our interfaces, all of our reals together. Let's see, how do we have it? Yeah, I think it might be useful to group all of our interfaces together, all of our reals together, and all of our stubs together.
Okay. So let's take this, move this up. And then tighten up some spacing here. Where's the other interface?
Hey, Jodo, welcome. What we're doing here is we're creating what's called a nullable. And that's a particular style of programming that allows us to test things using real production objects but prevent them from talking to the outside world. There's an article here. And we are currently making an HTTP client that will go out and make HTTP gets and posts for us. And we're going to make that nullable so that we can make the rest of our code easier to test.
Okay. Now that's all organized. All right. So in getBody, so response entity wrapper.
So I think our stubbed response template, stubbed rest template, when it's making the new stubbed response entity, I think it needs to pass the class through.
Yeah. That's what I was looking for. So it's the response type, and that's the constructor. Response type. And response type dot get constructor.
I don't think we want any parameters, do we?
I think we're not. So the thing we're creating is the DTO that has no parameters, so that's fine. It would help if I actually called that.
Called the new instance.
What's it complaining about? Oh, I'm just going to wrap that with a try catch for now. Oh god, that's ugly.
Those are all runtime. So can we, why does it want us to catch those? Can't we just let it propagate?
They're not, they're checked. Some of these are checked. These are all checked exceptions.
Oh.
So we can shorten it up and we'll just basically wrap it with a runtime.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. I can use new instance. I am using new instance. Oh, that might have come before. Oh, I don't need the gets constructor call? Really? Yeah, that's deprecated.
It's been deprecated.
Since 9. This is... yeah, it's deprecated, so I'm not going to do that. All right. Probably hold on to the constructors of the field. That's an optimization. Okay, so what happens if we run? we're going to expect just an empty. So here we expect the example DTO to be there, but its content will be null. No, actually it'll pass. Work. Yeah, because that was the default you had me put in.
Yeah. I expected that to work. No such method exception. No init method. No empty init method.
No empty init method?
All right, there's something about Java's reflection that I'm not getting, because that seemed like it should work.
Oh, because it's an inner class. Let's move this up to be a top level class. Because otherwise we'd have to specify sort of
right
where it is, and that's just. Let's see if that fixes it.
No, but why would that matter? Because we're passing the class object through, so should just work, right?
Well, let's see. So, only if it's a non-static context. Since it's a static context, that's fine. The formal parameter types include the explicit and closing instance, so we don't need that. What are we getting? No such method.
It says it's not. Is it because it's not public?
They're in the same package, though. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Are they in the same package? They're in the same package.
They're in the same package, but the default security level for inner classes is different than outer classes. And I don't recall what the default is for inner classes, but it might be private.
Yeah, because there is a default constructor that's always created unless we created another one. So, okay, well, there we go.
Okay, so I think that's done. What we should do is we should duplicate that assertion a few times, and we should change the test name to say nulled get returns, not default value, returns requested instance or something like that. What I want to say is it's going to return an infinite number of instances of the class we requested.
So you're saying new instance for each request?
Yeah, that's not the important thing here.
Okay.
The important thing is that it's going to return well, actually, is this the behavior we want even? Like if nobody sets up a response on this, do we want to return?
I don't want to return. I actually don't like if it's not configured. I don't think I don't think I want a default.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and change this to be our next test then. Let's make this configured and make a note that we need to write a nulled get. Well, I mean, one of the core ideas with nullables is that create null always does something that works.
Okay, then if that, I mean, you should know what nullables are about. So if that's,
and the reason for that is because it's actually quite common where you just don't care.
You don't care.
And you're basically creating a dummy.
Right.
So you want it to not blow up.
That makes sense. So then in this case, it's always going to return the same content.
Yeah.
So null get returns default content. That's sort of what we had before, but you weren't happy with that.
Well, there's two things that I want to specify. One is that it will return an infinite stream of them. And the second thing I want to say is what is the thing that we're returning? And it's not just default content, but it's default instance forever or unconfigured instance or something like that.
Unconfigured versus default, does that have meaning?
It's just like, what does default mean? Uninitialized?
Configured. I'm fine with unconfigured. I was just trying to get at what you were thinking there.
Yeah. Basically, what I'm saying is we're not setting the content.
Right,
we're just leaving everything at its initial values.
Right. So, is that what we're going to expect for now?
Yeah. And then we want to do that a few times just to prove that we're doing it forever.
All right. That passes.
Okay.
Do you want to
so let's do
we want to do a commit yet?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Oh, wait, before you commit, let's add the create factory method.
Okay.
And get rid of line 10.
Oh, right. Can't until we do the post.
Let's just comment that one. Oh,
I mean, nobody's using it, so we can comment that out. Okay. Great.
I would actually say that what we've done is we've made HTTP or JSON HTTP client nullable.
Right.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move that example.
Sweegie pointed out that we're not that I duplicated the wrong thing 3 times. That's actually what we're doing 3 times. Right. It's not that the get content works. It's that actually good catch, Sweegie. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I totally missed that.
Okay. Should still work. Yep. Great. Awesome. All right. I'm going to amend that commit.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move the example DTO down out of our way. And let's move on to the next test, which says, this says null fetcher returns configure value. What was the name of our first test?
So we can say null get returns configured value.
How about null get can be configured to return? I mean, you can wordsmith this, but basically what we're saying is it can be configured to return an infinite number of the same value, of the same thing.
Is that too close to? Okay. Do we like that?
Yeah, it's okay. Null get returns unconfigured instance. The way it's written makes me think that is always true. But really it's null get returns unconfigured instance forever by default. Null get can be configured to return instance forever. I don't know how much you care about your test names and how they read.
Yeah, the words can be in a test feels weird to me because it's like, well, just if it can be, then you are.
Right. Well, there's multiple options, right?
And the can is sort of spread across the fact that there are tests that do and tests that don't.
Yeah, I don't feel strongly about it.
Okay.
So what we want to do is we want to make an example DTO that has something in it.
Yeah. So let's. Actually, we don't need to do that because that's what the setter is for. Okay. So what we're going to need to do is figure out how do we want to configure. Are we configuring? We're configuring it with an example DTO that will be that, and that one will be the one that's returned. Is that what we're doing? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Then actually, I'm going to make the constructor, and then.
I can't speak for JitterChed Whiskey, but I got to say, using JavaScript with name parameters and default values does make create null really nice.
Yeah.
It can get a little bit ugly in Java and C# because you basically have to create an options object to do your config, or a config object to do your configuration for you.
Yeah, I like Kotlin. I just don't do it because I don't like it more than Java enough to switch to it. But yeah, the fact that you and this is where in Java you end up with the fluent builder pattern because it's because you can't have sort of optional parameters and or named ones. Yeah,
and that's exactly how you do it is with that builder pattern, the fluent builder.
Yeah. What am I doing?
I ended up doing that in TypeScript as well, just because doing the optional undefined patterns in TypeScript sort of pushes you towards having a specific type, an explicit type for it.
Right. So we want something like that.
Yep.
And then we want it's an HttpClient, new create null. Thanks. And we want to pass in .configured. Hit the constructor for this. No. I'm going to create an additional constructor. Okay, you're going to go away. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't know this one's used because it's used by reflection. Okay. And now we want to create an overloaded method.
That's going to have to be parameterized. So I said I wanted get to be to be templated, but actually maybe the whole thing needs to be templated. That gets ugly.
Yeah, though. If we are gonna, if this is gonna
actually,
be a type,
I think that needs to be object. Like, and then if they pass in the wrong thing, then
so we'll cast it. And if they pass in the wrong thing, yeah, they'll go. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to return a new client with a new stub template that is going to take the configured object.
Okay, so Whiskey is bringing up a really good point that I'd forgotten about. But go ahead and finish this, but then we have to adjust it.
Okay. Create constructor. Yeah, create constructor. And we're going to need to create a new object. I'm just thinking, so we could take the configured value, hold on to it, and then pass it in here?
Yes.
Or we could basically create this right up front.
With the
configured value right away that gets returned by the get body.
Yeah, I like that. Let's do that.
So let's see. So
actually, no. Because the next thing we're going to do. So what we need to do is actually make a map here with URLs, and we need to map URLs to the response, and then we're going to have the response be either a single value or an array.
Right.
So it's going to get complicated.
Yeah, it's
that's what Whiskey was alluding to. And so I think what we need to do is pass it through in the, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Stubbed REST template is going to make the decisions about what is returned, and stubbed response entity is just going to do the construction.
Yeah. All right. So let's just hold on to that. Let's hold on to that for now. Yeah, because it's going to actually have to map technically
all of those
things. Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Yeah. This is why you do this once, and then you just use it over and over again.
Never need to do it again. Yeah. Okay. So we've got our object. We've got our configured value. Let's write the test.
Now, is that?
I know it's going to fail, but I want to.
Oh, we never wrote the test.
We never finished the test, so let's do that. So what we're saying is that the JSON HTTP client, when we do a get, and we expect it to be an example DTO class. That's going to be our example DTO. And we're going to assert that the example DTO get content is equal to configured.
Yeah, and repeat that a couple of times as well. Oh, yeah, repeat both of them a couple of times.
Oops. Actually help. Okay.
We expect that to fail. It's going to get probably initial value back.
It's going to get that. Yeah, it should get initial value. So.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Good.
So Whiskey Sierra says, could get away with using response entity okay. Yeah, but the minute we do something other than that, I think that's we'd have to undo that. So, but we'll see. Maybe that's an optimization. All right. So now.
So I think what we want to do is we want to move the get body implementation up into get for entity. Do it a little bit ugly and then fix it. But basically, if configured value is null, we want to do line 104. Otherwise, we want to do line 91. And then we'll pass in that configured value into the constructor on line 98. That's what I'm thinking.
So let's see. So we're saying.
Basically saying move the instantiation up to this method that you're in right now.
Oh, move this instantiation?
Yeah.
Of the object?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Because what we need to do is instantiate a default instance if there is no configured value, and use the configured value if there is one. So that decision happens at the stubbed rest template level.
Okay, I'm going to copy. So here we're saying if configured value is null,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we're going to get, this needs to be wrapped though.
wrapped in what?
In the response entity wrapper.
Yeah, no, we're going to return a new stubbed response entity. Can I drive? I think it'll be easier for me to.
Yeah, I think I know, but you can go ahead and drive.
Yeah. Actually, you can go ahead and drive if you're getting it, because I don't have my IDE set up.
So let me. Okay, so if configured value equals null, then but this is going to be variable. This is our response.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. And then we will return new stub response entity. No.
Response.
But that's not what this is taking, unless we're saying we're going to add.
Well, we're going to change all of that.
Oh, okay. So we are going to add that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to make stubbed response entity take the actual response, and then and getBody is just going to return the response dot. Just get the response. That's correct.
That's right. That's right. Let's take out the file here.
That goes away entirely.
So do that. If it's not null, then we return. Oh, I see. Okay. And we return configured value.
Yeah.
And then this goes away. This goes away. Except configured value is an object, so we'll have to cast it. Because we said object here without having to generify the entire thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've got to cast it somewhere.
Yeah,
I was
and this
is cast it inside of getBody, but that's as good a spot as any.
Yeah, I mean, because otherwise we could put object here and then cast it here.
But then it's more distant from the actual error.
Yeah. This is. Yeah.
Yeah. If we do it here, then it will happen. Well, it'll still happen at the same time. It'll happen when you call get, but.
And then this can be T. And then, what's it complaining about?
Why is that?
Are those two different T's?
Well, getBody needs to be changed, so that should return this .configured response. The whole thing. You don't need the try catch
that's right.
anymore.
Yeah. What is?
Oh yeah.
What does it think it's doing?
It's just public T, not public angle bracket T.
Oh, I didn't even see that.
Oh no, it's just public stub response entity. I don't think you need the T at all.
Oh, because this is the constructor. I got confused for a second. I thought it was a method. All right.
Okay. Don't refactor that yet. We've got some more mess to do, so we'll come back to it.
All right.
But this should work, right?
So we do that. Configured value. We're configuring it. So what held on to it? When we do the get, we return the configured value, which has the which is the configured response. Okay, the name is a little bit confusing, but yep, that works.
Okay, I wonder. We should probably take another break soon, but I wonder if you scroll up to create null, the fact that we're passing in an object is bugging me because I just see this causing problems at runtime.
Yeah.
What if we parameterize get create null? We don't have to parameterize create, but we can parameterize create null, so it has to be a T, and then pass that through.
That might work.
We would still have a problem if get and create were different types. Oh no, it won't work because again, create null is going to take a whole array of stuff.
Yeah, it depends on it depends on what it.
Yeah. But the test passed, right?
Yes, test passed.
Okay. So I think what we need to do next after our break is we need to modify null get returns configured instance forever to be based on the URL, including the variables. So that's our next step.
All right.
And I would probably do that as another test.
Yeah.
We will have to modify this to take a parameter on the create null.
Right.
So we might as well do that. But then another test, which is something along the lines of null get can be, I know you don't like that, can return different values for different endpoints. Or null get returns different values for different endpoints.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah.
All right, Sweetie, have a good night.
Thanks, Sweetie.
All right, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll do that.
So in my full-featured version of HttpClient, Nullable HttpClient, which I have to admit, I did not do this right away. Like when I first started doing this, I just made the nullables exactly the way we did.
Right.
But over time, I realized, well, wait, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. Why don't I factor it out?
Right.
And then over even more time, I realized, well, I want to test some really sophisticated things. So we're sort of speed running this. We're going right to the end.
Right.
And it is handy, it's handy to have infinite streams of results as well as configured or multiple values. All this stuff is not stuff that your code really needs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And really, I think the ultimate end result, like in a couple of years after everybody has seen the light and is using nullables everywhere, you'll just use a library, right? You'll have a nullable HttpClient library that you use, and it will have all the stuff.
Right.
And maybe this is the beginnings of that. But until then, I want to share with you what I've done in my code, and we can decide how much of that we do.
Okay.
In my HttpClient, my full-featured one, it does all the stuff we're talking about here, but it also takes additional parameters. Now, that is a low-level HttpClient, so you tell it, I want this status, I want these headers back, I want this body back.
Right.
But you can also tell it, I want this error back, so throw an exception, and I want to hang. So act as if the server connects and responds. You know how servers do.
Yep.
Because
the worst servers are the ones you never are the ones that either never respond or respond variably. Actually, those are the worst.
Yeah, it'll be like one character, one byte every second, right?
Like just enough to keep you hooked.
Just enough to keep the connection alive. Yeah. So of course, in real production code, you've got to deal with errors, you've got to deal with timeouts, and so that's why my Nullable has those capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I think since we're wrapping REST template wrapper, I don't know that we have the ability to simulate a hang. I don't know what that would look like with REST template wrapper.
I don't I don't know either. I'd have to dig in a little bit.
And I don't know if we want to have the ability to throw an arbitrary error either. But these are the kinds of things that I do put in my real sort of full meal deal HTTP client.
I think returning an error, like hang, I think is hard or actually it might be really easy. I don't know. It might just be,
I think it would be really hard because ultimately what's happening is somewhere under the covers a thread's happening, right?
Yeah, so somewhere it's doing a block on the IO, and the question is can I plug into to where it's doing that? I don't know. Yeah. Sleep doesn't well, anyway. But in terms of controllable errors, I mean, granted, this yacht application, especially since it was a quick and dirty talking to the server, if the server's down, it just fails. If the server if I mucked up the URL, it just gives you a 404. So being able to simulate sort of some of that basic stuff of, can't connect and 404,
and this is where we're getting to the point of having the real tests would be handy, because what we want to do is we want to simulate that real behavior in our Nullable. So, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because we're starting to get to the point where we need to design the configuration data structure. And so what do we want that to look like? I'm thinking a map that is going to have the URLs on one side as the keys.
That's the key.
And fully parameterized. So if you're looking for foo/foo/bar a equals 1 and /? a equals 2, those would both be different keys with their own responses. We could set it up so that there was a third option where it was like, we don't care what the query parameter is, but I don't think there's any case where that's actually useful. I think those are distinct URLs from a nullability perspective, because in our tests we're gonna have control over which parameters we're passing. So our URL, including query parameters, is going to be our keys, and then our values is going to be either the configured value or an array of configured values, I think. So either an infinite stream of values or an array of values. And then when we look up the key and it doesn't exist, we either return our default, or maybe that's where we do the 404 type of thing.
And so you're thinking the list or the array of responses, you'd round robin, or you just go off the end and then you'd have some error?
Same way we did it for the dice roller. We would, if you're going to provide, because this is used mostly in tests, if you get to the end and you're still asking for something has gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that I want to jump yet to. I mean, we could put in var args, but I don't. I'm trying to think. I mean, as you said, it's like this is way overkill for what Yacht currently needs. So no matter what we do, it's overkill.
But there's advantage. Like people can use this code in their own projects because or something like it. I think it's a good example. And I was hoping that once we had this, we could put some tests around your fetcher and notifier that does, that does handle some of the more sophisticated cases, like maybe not the hangs, but at least the error handling, right? Or when we get to doing your controllers, we'll be able to say, well, how does this behave when it errors out? Let's actually test that and let's actually handle it.
Okay.
So yeah, I think the results needs to be either a single value or a list. I think we could get away with having it just be a list and not doing an infinite stream of responses. But that list needs to be either a list of values or an exception. And if there's an exception, then it needs to throw that exception.
So, okay, so let's see. So we're saying for our parameters...
Can we throw an exception through reflection?
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah,
I mean, it becomes an object.
Can we do it?
If you can instantiate it, you can throw it, because what is a throw? It's a throw takes an object.
Oh, it's just an object, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has to be of type exception, but as long as it's of type exception, you can throw it all over the place. So as long as we can instantiate, we can throw it, and then if we can, so as long as we know what to instantiate, we can do that. But we wouldn't have to instantiate. We can have the caller instantiate it, hand us the exception that you want, literally the exception object we want thrown.
Yeah,
and then it just throws
good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just check to see if this thing is an instance of runtime exception, then we'll throw it.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, the thrower could actually wrap the exception if it wanted to with something else, but no, that wouldn't. We'd want the stack trace. Well, let's not borrow too much from the future of what we need. So
let me just I just want to sanity check this real quick. Does it make sense for HttpClient to throw an arbitrary exception, or do we want to have specific cases that we allow to be configured, like no connection, not found, and so forth? What kind of exceptions does get for entity throw?
That's what I was going to look at. Oops, not that one. Where's the real thing? Real. Here we go. So it there's a REST client exception. These are the ones it throws. So REST client exception is the base exception class for all these other ones. So these should look familiar because they translate pretty much to for most of them the status code. So bad gateway, 5 something, bad requests, 4 something, conflict, forbidden, gone is 3 something. So I think there are other ones, and method not allowed. There are probably what gets thrown if it times out. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But it might be a more general networking exception, not specific to this class.
So yeah, let's punt this to the caller then and let them.
Yeah, because I think there's too many possible things.
Yeah. So we'll just say, if you want an exception from us, fine. We'll give you an exception. And I think, again, if I was trying to make this a little more production grade, well, honestly, I probably wouldn't use response entity. I'd probably use something a little lower level. And but I might look at the specific things that could go wrong and make those more configurable, because what we want to do is we want this to be as real as possible, so that when you configure it, it's something that really happens under that circumstance. Right. So punting that to the test is not the best thing ever, but I think it's fine in this case.
Yeah. So this is what we're saying, basically the URL so it either maps to a list of the configured values or an exception?
No, actually, that's not what I'm saying. I'm going to drive for a second.
Okay.
I think it maps to a list of something, and something maps to an exception object or an object to return.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And this maps to a list or a something. But I think if we want to make our lives easier, we can probably just have it map to a list of something rather than a something.
Yeah, because you can always do, I mean, it's hardly harder to have a list of one. especially if it's var. If it ends up being one or many, then this is just var args.
Yeah. Well, and the difference is this would be an infinite. Oops, I'm clicking something that you can't see. The first something would be an infinite stream, and this would be a finite stream. But I've never programmed my HTTP client to return an infinite stream because it just isn't super valuable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I actually think the way we should implement this is our very first test should actually throw that not found exception, and or maybe a not implemented exception. Well, whatever the equivalent of 501 is in Java.
I don't know, what does 501 mean?
501 is not implemented.
It's probably not implemented.
Yeah, it's yeah, and I don't think there's any case where we actually need a
not implemented.
Yeah, I don't think there's any case where we need an infinite stream.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, unless I was testing.
It's not like the die rolls where we just don't care and we just give us all the die rolls forever. This is a case where anytime we're testing it, we're gonna know exactly what we want back.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, and it's one of those. If we find out that we actually do need it, we can always implement it.
Yeah. No, we are going to need it. We're going to need it when we implement the fetcher. Yeah, I think it should be an infinite something or a list of something.
That's fine. We can still make it in terms of the signature. We can make it var args, and if var args is length of 1, unless you want to be really explicit, in which case then we would have no var args, and we'd have either it's a something or it's a list of something. That might be more clear.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Because if you actually...
And that something is really just an object. I think we can just, at runtime, see if it's an exception. If it's an exception, we throw it. Otherwise, we return it.
Okay, so... So for this one, we're saying that our create null, what we want to pass in is the URL. So first...
Are you thinking of doing this with var args and a list, like key value, key value, key value? Or do you want to pass in a map?
I was thinking get it working for one configured, and then do many, but we could start right away with many. So we could do
well, I want to get the signature right, even if we don't.
Yeah, so we could do map. We could do map of. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is basically key value, key value.
Okay.
And so we said our value was going to be just object.
Yeah. It should be. Well, actually, let me try for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think we're actually doing. We've already got this case. Oops.
Oh, okay. So we can convert that one right away.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll let you format it the way you like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back to you.
Okay. So let's see. Create null map of. Let's go put this on the same line.
And let's make that map of configured because that's what we've got for our assertions.
Sorry, say that again?
I'll just type it.
Okay. Okay. Right. So we want this to work since this is taking an object. That's why it compiles. So.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah, so it shouldn't take an object, it should take a map.
So let's see. So if it's going to take a map, that's fine. All right. Oops, not that. We want that. Let's change this to map. And we're saying this is string to object for now.
Yeah.
And that's funny that also configured.
And let's call that endpoints.
Endpoint responses?
Endpoints with an S. Endpoint responses, sure.
And our stubbed REST client, REST template, this also needs to be the map. We're gonna map it. We're gonna map at this level, right? Because this has the information. So string object. So just map. Okay. So that won't work at all. So that should fail if we try to run it.
Right, that's going to return the map to us.
Yeah. So we'll expect actually a class cast. Yeah. Okay. So good. That fails as expected. So now we can say, we'll leave that alone. We want endpoint responses.
Yeah, based on the URL.
Get URL. Cool.
Yeah. Can I add another test?
Sure.
So we've got. Okay, let me think about this for a second. Yeah.
Do you want to test?
I had something in my mind, and now it's slipping out of my mind.
Do we want another test that where instead of the example, it's an exception? So tell the difference.
We want that. There's a bunch of things we want. One is we want the nulled get to return to throw exception if path not configured. Oh, but here's the thing we need. Yeah, I knew I needed it. Nulled get returns different values based on URI and parameters. You can fix that later. But so we're going to say map of configured 1 question mark parm equals 1 or parm equals A, B, and configured 2. See where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're probably getting to the point where we need to make a helper.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing this over and over is getting to be annoying.
Yeah, especially getting it to match.
Sorry, what?
Getting it all to match up correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so Whiskey Sierra says, by having a string, we're forced to interpolate the URI template yourself. Yeah. I think... I don't...
That's a good point.
I think we need to handle that. Offhand, I'm not sure the right way to do that.
I didn't actually set up the configured example DTOs.
Yeah, I know. I was actually gonna do that. I'm just thinking about the string. I think let's leave it for now, and then we'll tackle that. So let's get this to work. Because otherwise I'm gonna get stuck in that. Okay, so this is 2, 3. So this is 1A, 1B, 2.
And if you comment out, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, look. I need the map of.
Oh, my bad.
That's all right. There we go. Okay. There.
Okay, if you comment out line 70 and 71, 72, this should still pass because we're already doing the parameterization based on for URL, I think. No, that's not going to pass. We'd have to take the parm equals A off.
I think it'll actually work.
No, I don't think it will.
Oh, we didn't set the equals to. So this is 1A. This is 1B. This is 2.
I don't think it will work because
this is just a blind string. The fact that there is interpolation happening underneath the covers is something that we might want to think about.
Yeah, but how is it matching that string?
It just.
Oh, right, because we're not actually doing the interpolation yet.
Right.
Right, of course. So yeah, what we need to do to make this test complete is we need to do the interpolation.
Yeah. So we're basically saying that there are no variables, and so this is just a raw string.
Right.
But as you said, if we leave this, well, this should still work because we're not. So just strings.
Yeah. But as soon as we add the variables.
Right.
So let's just think about this for a second. Do we care about the case where there's a variable?
I think the get needs to be able to pass in variables, and I think the response needs to be dependent on that. And so I think I would not want. So what I was thinking is that the key would either be just the URL and would be a composite object of the URL plus basically what we're handing in here, this and this. So sort of create a composite object for the key that has both of these.
Just trying to think about how it's going to be used in terms of what would be most useful. So it's parameterized. We're passing that through to the...
Yeah, so if we were actually using this, what it would look like is A.
Right. And then that would be...
And that would be like that.
Question mark parm equals
right.
something.
And then,
it's parm, not param. Yeah.
so if we did that, then this would be the same thing. So let's make it more clear that this is not relevant. And then this is B. And then this is interesting. So this we can't hand in just a string.
Well, we could, but we'd have to do the interpolation.
Well, right. Yeah, and I don't want to do the reverse interpolation in my stub.
Okay. Why not? Is it hard?
There's enough edge cases that I would not want to do it myself. I'd rather just create a composite object. And this is where we probably wanted some helper stuff.
Okay.
So so that means our map is going to be not string to, what do we have? String to object, but basically endpoint.
Yeah, endpoint. I don't know. It's starting to feel ugly. Let me take a second look at this. So in our average score fetcher, we've got score category equals score category. Yeah, we're going to want to be able to return a different value for each score category, aren't we?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, let's do it.
So our endpoint map is going
So what are those edge cases you're talking about with the interpolation?
Well, one is depending on how you're calling it. Right now I'm currently only using the positional form because I only have one parameter. But you actually can call it where this last parameter is also a map. And then what's in between the braces then is get looked up and then replaced by the contents of the map matching that key.
Right. But we don't have to worry about that because that's not the method we're using. We only have to support the actual method we're calling.
Okay. If we're saying that this must use the non basically the positional one.
I mean, the reason the embedded stub is alongside the production code is because it is tightly coupled to the implementation. If we change the implementation, we change the stub.
Yeah, my concern is implementing stuff that Spring implements. And so basically duplicating an implementation of what they're doing and doing it in a way that is not 100% compatible.
Well, I wasn't thinking we would implement the template. I was thinking we would use the URI template class. I was hoping we could just use what already existed and have it do the templating for us.
I mean, we could use the URI builder factory. I guess I feel like that's work that why should we do that? Why not just?
Because I really like how clean this reads on the left, the way it is now.
I think it could be just as clean. I mean, so instead of map of, it would be just map of something else, and building this would be just 2 parameters or multiple parameters.
The reason I like this, and I can be talked out of it, but the reason I like this is because if I'm looking at a test, again, I like things that are super concrete. So if I'm looking at the test, I want to know the actual endpoint that's being called, not have to decipher a template, right? I want to say, yeah, this is the URL that's being called right here, this one right here. And then my production code is using a template and doing all that stuff. That's part of what I'm testing. I want to know that it's using the template correctly and passing it through and it's getting constructed down. But in my test, I want to say this URL and nothing else other than that URL.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. No, yeah. that actually makes sense. I see what you're saying. Okay, we could do that.
I might be setting us up for a world of hurt, which I don't really want to do.
It's actually not terribly hard with the URI builder. I was just concerned that we're doing work that we didn't need to do for no benefit, but I see the benefit. So
yeah, there's a fine line, right?
So then it's going to still be that. So when we do the lookup, where do we want to? We can resolve it here in the stubbed. So here, so instead of URL, this is going to be concrete URL. I can't think of a better name right now. So this will be our, and what we'll do is so let's see, URI. Oh yeah,
Whiskey just interpolated URL. I like that a lot.
Okay, Whiskey. URI. Builder factory. So what does this do for us? So that's an interface. Our components builder. From path. Let's try this.
Whiskey in the chat said it might not be that bad. Hey, Whiskey, we're counting on you to figure this out for us.
So let's see. So set default URI variable. So URI string is our URL. Query params.
Query params, perhaps?
Well, this one takes the map. This is the one we want.
That's one name and multiple values.
Yeah.
Whiskey says expand.
Expand? Oh, okay. That's, we get it. So this returns a URI. So if we expand the URL with the URI variables, and then we to string it. Okay. So
that might work.
We think that might work. Let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's make sure.
Whiskey's right. It wasn't too bad.
So let's put X here, and we expect that to fail because X is not B or something. Null pointer.
Perfect. I mean, perfect in a way. So yeah, now I think that's
right. Because right. Because yep.
Now we're going to throw a not found exception.
Yeah.
But let's write a test for that.
Yeah. So okay.
Actually, can I write the test?
Sure.
I think that just comes back up into here. Null get rows not found exception for unconfigured endpoints. Yeah, and then make that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah.
So make that throw an exception.
So insert that by
exert throws. Oh,
so you're saying insert that this. Oops.
Oh no, it's actually line 15 that's going to throw.
Oh, is it the get that we want the get to throw? Yeah.
That's
okay.
Right.
So this goes away. We don't care about the return value. Oops. Why is that not doing? And this we want. So that thrown by, we're saying not found.
Yep, that's it. Just not found.
Class. Okay. Okay, so this should fail because we're not throwing anything. Or a null pointer. No, okay, it didn't throw anything. Yep. All right, because it would have been default. So
that should just turn around and call the create null with an empty map.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't say new JSON HTTP client. It should be JSON HTTP client.create null.
Oh, right. It's like, why is it not working? There we go. That'll still fail.
Yeah, it will fail, but it'll fail for the right reason.
And so now we're saying in our stubbed, if we do the lookup, so let's pull this out.
Yeah.
Oops. Sure. Response. I guess we could do a contains key. Let's do that. If endpoint responses contains key, interpolated URL, then we return it. Else throw not found. What is not found? Okay. Why are you getting confused, IntelliJ? It's a bunch of interesting stuff.
Mm. Actually, let's do, rather than not found, let's do not implemented.
I mean, for this, we could just do empty status text. The headers, we could just be empty. And the rest is nullable, so we can pass in null and null. Because those are the character sets in the body, and there is no body, so that's fine.
Yeah.
What is this?
These are all runtime exceptions. Why is it griping at us?
So not found is a runtime. So what is it complaining about? Oh, not found is private access. So it's not, we can't throw our own? Really?
Didn't the REST client throw a, or didn't the REST wrapper throw a, the REST template throw REST exceptions?
Yeah, this might be in the wrong this might be the wrong one. Yeah. Let's go to REST template. let's look at REST client exception. So
no, it's
found.
it's the
this is the one.
But that one's public. That one was public that you just looked at.
So the class is public. The constructors are private. Yeah. I don't know why they did that.
Yeah. This is the thing with heavyweight frameworks, isn't it? You eventually got into a situation like this.
Well, the create, actually, we could use the create and let it create the exceptions.
Oh, is that what it's doing?
I guess that's how we're supposed to use it.
Okay, well, that's not so bad. I take back some of the bad things I just said.
So HttpClient error exception create. And so then the status is not found. Oops, not that one. Not found. And what are the other parameters? The status text, not found.
Actually, for the status text, let's do the URL. The interpolated URL.
Interpolated URL. I think the headers. Empty headers. And empty body and empty character set. All right. And then throw. Okay. That's interesting why they decided to
lost track a little bit, but I think that will work.
So let's see. So if it does not contain the key, we will throw not found. If this definitely does not contain the key, it should throw that. I think that'll work. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, do we want to return not, do we want to throw not found, or do we want to return throw not implemented? And the reason I ask is because not found is actually kind of a legit thing that you would expect to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas not implemented is not. And I kind of want this is a test error, right?
Yeah.
So I would be inclined to say not implemented or something like that.
I agree. I think not implemented is the one we want. Okay. So here we can just say, should just be able to say not implemented.
And Whiskey asks, isn't the status text defined as the text corresponding to the status code? I don't think so. I don't know what exactly they're doing here, but the server doesn't give you text. So it's presumably.
Yeah, actually, I'd have to look deeper into what actually the status text is.
So that's interesting. We got the wrong error back. Like, it actually worked. We got a 501 unconfigured.
Oh, it got turned into a general. Wait.
It's the wrong.
Oh, it's the wrong.
It's supposed to be HttpClient error exception.
Yes. Yeah. HttpClient error exception. Why not? Let's try this again. Can we not?
I think you might be right, Whiskey. I think it is part of the status line. I don't think it matters in this case.
What did it actually create? Now I'm confused. What did it actually create?
It looked like it just made a HttpClient error exception. So we can just do that.
Yes, because it does not check for 501. By the way, this is This is one of the things I actually really hate about the REST template implementation is that for status codes, they throw exceptions.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, here.
Here's the status code.
Here's the status code. Because to catch an exception for, especially like not found, it, to me just baffles me. It just...
Yeah, and not only that, they make them runtime exceptions.
Yeah, like, and so like... all right. So let's just say that it's one of these. And that should...
Yeah. I want to do one more thing here.
Yeah.
And that is, I want to change, now that we're not doing 404, I want to have this be URL not configured. Like that.
Yep. And so we can test that as message.
And actually just leave it like that for now. I want to see what it reads like when it fails.
Should be just a diff on the,
501, URL not configured, unconfigured.
Oh, that's interesting. So they stuff this message and then prepend it with the actual status code.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll just take whatever that is and assume that's correct.
Actually, so let's make it 501 dash URL not configured. Yeah. No, I think you had it right. Oh, no, you didn't.
There was one too many spaces here because they added the space for us. Cool.
Okay.
So it's probably a good stopping point.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. So yeah, your thoughts on what we've done today?
So we've gotten our JSON client. We've implemented the get. We have a lookup for our configured URLs.
Actually, before we stop, Whiskey just made a really good point.
Null version of the client, no such element.
I think they're right. Yeah. I was stuck in, so in my HTTP client, I don't throw an exception. I just return a status, a headers, and a body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course,
right. So you can't tell the difference, right? But we can actually test for the exception. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So let's do that.
Let's do that.
This we were being silly.
So no such element.
But I think the rest of this is correct. So we'll just say URL not configured.
Yeah.
Don't have to have the 501.
Yeah. So let's change. So. No. And yeah, that's a lot better. So that should now pass.
That should still work.
Yep. Thank you, Whiskey Sierra. You've been a great help today.
That was a good suggestion. Yeah, we were often down a rabbit hole, which I usually find that pairing prevents those sorts of rabbit holes or helps prevent them. But
well, this was where you in JavaScript, like you said, is like you wouldn't be throwing an exception here. The thing we're using is, well, let's just check the exception directly, and I couldn't tell the difference because I hadn't seen sort of what your context was. So
yeah. So in terms of checking this in, what we've done, we're sort of in the middle of something, because we've got some messed up code in there that's sort of left over that we're going to implement. So let's say partial implement. Actually, what we've done is we have the JSON HTTP client nullables support configuring based on endpoint. Yeah. Yeah, it's not based on endpoint. It's really it's URL. Yeah, and shouldn't that be JSON HTTP client?
Yeah.
Yeah, or unconfigured URLs, really.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
and what we have to do next is support multiple return values.
For a single
endpoint or a single URL.
Yep. All right. Cool. Oh, that was pretty intense for me, at least.
It was more work than I expected. I came into this and thought, oh, we're just gonna take the stuff that we already have and redo it. But I forgot going into this. I forgot that we were going to need to do all that mapping.
Right.
Right. And we still have to do post as well, and we have to do the tracking responses or the tracking output, the output tracking. But yeah, I guess we're not using that anymore.
Yeah, just noticed it.
So I think people might be wondering why bother doing this. And I think it pays off when it comes to doing the testing at the UI level, at the application level, and also to a lesser degree, it's going to pay off at the average score fetcher and notifier levels. Like we'll now be able to put tests around those that you didn't have before.
Right.
But this is the code that's, I mean, the low-level infrastructure wrappers, these are the things that are most difficult to set up because you do have to do the embedded stub and you do tend to put some sophistication around it. We don't have to put the sophistication around it. Like I said, we're sort of jumping to the end based on me doing this over 5 years.
Right.
But once you have that capability, it's really nice. So you kind of want it.
Right. In this case, you are kind of going to need it. So
yeah. Well, and admittedly, I'm part of the reason I'm doing this, part of the reason I'm having us do this is because I think it's interesting, not because we need it.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's why we're doing all of this, because it is interesting.
Yeah. And I think it will be neat to see how this works out once we finish this, we get to pull up a level to average score fetcher, then we get to pull up a level from there to game service, and then we get to pull up a level from there to the controllers.
Right.
And the sort of ripple effect that will all have is nifty.
I don't know, Whiskey Sierra. Someday, maybe, perhaps.
Well, for what it's worth, Whiskey, after writing the new version of the Testing Without Mocks article, I've realized that the next thing I need to do to get people to really do this is when I wrote the first edition in 2018, I didn't realize that there was such a thing as a generic HTTP client that would have all this power to do the hanging and the errors. But the more I worked with it, the more I realized I'm just, I keep wanting the same thing. And so I made it more and more powerful. And so now my next step after I get this article done and out is I'm going to make, at least for NPM, an NPM library to publish and for people to use. And it's just going to have all these low-level node nullables in it. A clock, a random, an HTTP client. Those are the big ones. Probably, and standard in, a standard out.
Yep.
And yeah, I think there's definitely room to do something like that with Java.
Database.
Whether that's Ted doing that or not, I don't know. But
I mean, there's no cost to me putting it open source and throwing it up on Maven as a wrapper for REST template. What would be interesting is to have the nullable, because it is an abstraction. REST template is not deprecated, but it is sort of, they won't make any additions to it, because really actually it's done. Like, people say, it's not, it's not deprecated, nobody's going to be modifying. It's like, okay, but what else do you want it to do? It's HTTP. But there is the newer web client that's in sort of the reactive stuff, even though I don't care about the reactive, but it'd be interesting to use this. Like you said, it's like nullables, you're not committing to some huge thing. It's like, I could just use this part, this nullable, and the rest of it's still my hexagonal with adapters. The nullable's used by the adapter. The adapter becomes then actually a bit, also non-IO. And then I could test the adapters more easily. So I certainly see trying out something like this and seeing, what if I plug this into like my real world project? How does that feel? And especially one that's communicating with more external services that I don't control. Yeah.
Where you want a little bit more of that testability.
Yeah, exactly.
Around it. Yeah. And the nice thing about the low-level wrapper like this is once you have an interface you like, you could swap out from REST client to something else, and it wouldn't be a big deal. A lot of the work that we're doing here is not really specific to REST client.
No, exactly. Yeah.
You could swap out the implementation to use the new non-deprecated form. You wouldn't get any of the fancy new features from having it be reactive, but you don't really want those. So that would potentially be a benefit.
Yeah, I don't want those. Yeah. I think reactive is a dead end, but it's a separate conversation. All right.
Well, final comment for Whiskey. If I do that, when I do that node nullables project, which I'm likely to do, it's not going to include anything for the DB because it is going to just be node nullables. I'm going to do a whole bunch in one project because it just makes my life a little bit easier. But in the future, if I want to support database, then I'll have to support a specific database, right? So that would be down the road somewhere.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So
all right. Well, that's all for today, folks. Thanks so much, especially for those who renewed their subscription, resubscribed, and newly subscribed. Thank you, folks. Dodo to Attitude, Sweegie, and John CVV. Appreciate that. And Whiskey Sierra and others who are useful with very useful comments. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I love seeing the interaction. Thanks for your comments and help.
That's one of the reasons I like doing this, is not just because I get to pair with James, but also get that interaction, which is great. All right. Anything else you want to say?
I think we're on again next week, next Tuesday, 2 to 5 Pacific. Is that right?
Think so. Let me double check. Yes, we are. It is on my schedule and reserved.
And as always, the archive is available at jamesshore.com/s/nullables-livestream. Has all the back episodes if you're interested.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Whiskey Sierra. Yeah, go to sleep. Sorry, not sorry. You're still up. All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.